So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar. And today we're going to talk about how you kick off your data and AI journey with focus and confidence. And so my name is Andrej Varanovic. I'm a data and AI lead at InSpark. And today I'm co-hosting this webinar with Marta. So perhaps you introduce yourself, Marta, a bit.
Yes. So hi. I am the founder and CEO of Remember to Play, which is a strategic design consultancy, and we mostly focus on supporting clients with basically strategic decision making. But to describe a little bit more what we do, so we're different than traditional consultancies because we actually draw from the field of creative problem solving and design to facilitate a collaborative and co-creative process of decision making. So in the end, we actually help our customers to, take decisions and move forward with the confidence that they're doing the right thing. And yeah, I met Andrej in connection with some projects that we did together, and so we also started this discussion about data and AI projects, and from that kind of emerged this whole conversation about hurdles and things that can go wrong when you actually embark on this journey. So that was kind of the initial point for starting this webinar, and we wanted to take the opportunity to share these observations that we have.
Nice, cool. So great to have you here today, and let's move on our agenda.
Yes, so basically we divided this into 3 parts, and the first one will be very brief introduction to the context. So I'm pretty sure that most of you are already familiar with this topic, so very briefly about what is the problem opportunity and kind of the solution that we're talking about when we talk about data and AI. And then the major part, we will talk about these 3 hurdles or patterns that we identified that stand between organizations and the successful adoption of data and AI, and actually we will hint at how to overcome these, and we will wrap up with a Q&A session, so then you also have the opportunity to ask follow-up questions and clarify if something wasn't clear to you. Yes, so I will very briefly just talk about this, and I'm pretty sure that this is no big news to you. So the increasing amount of data that is available to businesses, it actually poses both a challenge and an opportunity. Essentially, here we have numbers from the smart building industry, where we can see that data volumes have been doubling every 2 years. So essentially, this is really a fact, and I can imagine that you also experiencing this in your own practice. The amount of data that you are not only collecting but also generating is really increasing almost by the minute. So
wait a moment, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I think we need to solve some because the data is was not really moving. Let's see if is now okay. Now it's better. Sorry, it was some technical issue.
Good. So that means that people didn't see the slides.
Yeah, but that one I think should be good.
Okay, so just short recap here. So you see these are exemplary numbers from the smart building industry, and this amount of data really exponentially increasing. And so the kind of general notion that we're getting from the industries is, that the solution is in all of the things related to data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and there the promise is that using these technologies, we can take data and create insights out of this, and therefore enable informed decision making. And this all sounds really good, and it's like the silver bullet to our problem and the way to leverage this opportunity. But as you can see here, Gary Marcus, who's a professor of psychology and neuroscience at the New York University, says the biggest misconception around UI is that people think we are close to it. And I'm sure also Andre, as an expert in that field, can confirm that this is not necessarily the truth. So yeah, Andre, maybe you can talk about
yeah,
this
right.
a little
So
bit.
I mean, I think where's it coming, that perception, and the perception is coming from the things and names and products that we hear about every day. From self-driving cars and autonomous driving to voice assistants, all kinds of digital assistants, Netflix, smart home, those kind of things. Also some really breakthroughs in the research field, DeepMind. I think everyone heard about this, OpenAI, this research initiative. Sort of, those things, I guess, make this perception that things are already very, very far, and in some cases they actually are very far. And the question is, of course, also what it is exactly. And I often tend to consider actually three areas, which is data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. In this webinar, we're gonna use the term artificial intelligence as more as an umbrella term, which actually unifies everything that's going on in the data space. But in essence, I see the data science more as using sophisticated advanced statistical techniques to get new kinds of insights from the data. The whole field of machine learning is usually focusing on predicting things. And artificial intelligence to me is more not only about the machine learning component, but it's also about action or interaction with the real world. Like you can imagine, the car should now turn left or right. So it's not only about detecting some object in front of it, but also making decisions what should happen next. So that is a bit of what it is, and how we tend to also see and look at that whole landscape. And basically, of course, considering that whole landscape, the question for all of us, I think it's not about we shouldn't try, because it's a difficult topic. It's still very emerging topic, but the fact that we are not close to it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. And the rest of the webinar, we're gonna talk a bit about actually how should we try, approach and adopt the AI in our own organizations. And what we see happening is a couple of things. And if we recall, three of the key observations are basically what used to be a sort of typical way of start in uncertain product, uncertain environments, and uncertain technologies, namely proof of concept, is not the best way to actually start your data and AI journey. Choosing the right use cases is more challenging than expected. There is a lot of buzz. There is some things in the news every day, and it's just overwhelming. What is possible, but on the other side, it's also challenging to assess. What's the right use case for me and for my organization. And the third one is, of course, it's not the technical challenge, or not the only technical challenge, but also organizational one. So we're going to talk about now how to address this also, in particularly for the AI projects. Oh, still.
Okay, so slight technical problem. Reboot PowerPoint.
My lovely, super productive home screen. Huh?
Yeah, I think that's the benefits of doing live presentation.
So we're gonna restart the PowerPoint, and okay. Yes. Okay, and we left on the
yeah, just here.
So let's continue where we left. Right.
Good. So maybe I will pick up.
Yeah.
So basically, the way we will frame this conversation is around what we call three patterns. And essentially, these patterns are specific moments that organizations encounter on what we call this AI journey. And the three patterns that we will talk, they're actually happening like one after the other when you really embark on this journey. And you might find yourself currently in one of these three spaces, or maybe you are already behind and you already been through this, but essentially this is something that happens when you're in the phase, let's say, of initiating your AI projects. And so the first one that we will talk about is what we call problems worth solving. And this is essentially the first step that you're taking that you need to take into consideration when you want to assure a successful journey. And this is about avoiding to put effort into something that is not the right problem to be solved. And the right problem to be solved, we define as problems that actually should be solved with AI, so the ones that deserve a solution like AI, but also problems that can be currently solved with AI. And I will talk a little bit more in detail about this in a moment. So that's the first pattern. The second pattern is related to another challenge, which is really the skill or the capability to pick the right focus. So once you have identified the problems that are worth solving, it still doesn't mean that you have identified the one that you should focus on. So there's still quite a large variety. And what we see that is happening is that focus often is on projects that are somehow from a technical perspective interesting, but sometimes what is being neglected is really to understand what will be the impact on the business, what business value are we going to generate, and what would it actually take to implement such a solution. So that's what we're going to focus on there. And then the last thing, so once you actually have understood the problems, the use cases that are valuable for you, then it comes to this moment of actually planning and implementing a POC. And here we also see that often POCs are used to prove a technical point and not to actually explore and prove how would a solution actually work in your specific context and what does it mean for your organization to actually integrate and to implement such a solution. So we will talk a bit about who needs to be part of a successful POC so that it can actually be something valuable to your organization. So yeah, Andre will first initiate this conversation about problems worth solving by walking you through the types of problems that you actually might encounter.
Yeah, right. So basically here we identify two classes or two types of problems. And one problem is actually is problem driven, and the second one is capability driven. So I would like to talk about those two types and why it's important to identify actually what type of problem are you actually facing per each use case that you have. And you know, the problem driven can be classified as some type of a challenge where actually the problem is well understood. And this is quite important. You know, it's well understood and acknowledged on all levels. Doesn't really matter, you know, are you a CEO of the company or just a consumer using the product of the company, or just someone who sort of barely knows what company does, but sort of have some intuition, you know, that things could have been better, faster, and things like that. So I usually call them the big problems, the ones that exist already probably for several decades or even longer. So that is the key attribute of the problem driven, where it is, you don't need to specify what the problem is. The data is of course available, so data collection is not a challenge. Usually it actually ends up, there's a lot of data behind this particular problem, and the successful solution gives a significant advantage. So solving big problems, you know, there is this 10x notion where if something worth solving, then it should give you actually 10 times significant advantage over comparing to what you do things now. So those are the attributes of the problem-driven challenges. I just want to give a couple of examples. One is basically, you know, this one that you see on the slide. The Swiss railways, actually, they posted publicly a challenge where they asked, you know, how AI can help to optimize the train schedule. You know, it's obvious that, you know, trains are now running and not really efficient. It all depends on humans to plan things. However, you know, there is an incentive to utilize the infrastructure even more. And, you know, there is actually very little help from existing software. So the question is, you know, if and how AI can help to optimize the train schedule. So this is an obvious example of those big problems, because, you know, if you can solve it or at least provide some improvements, then the impact is obviously huge. So the second one is that one I imagined myself, and there are some people also working on actually solving these types of problems. Like if you imagine your package delivery, so here I put the DHL notification that I recently got, and you know, you always have this like, you know, your package is going to be delivered tomorrow, or in this actually case, which is pretty good already, from 12 to 16. However, you know, the accuracy for hours means that, you know, you need to be at home. It's not very accurate, and sort of if you're not at home, then, you know, you can either pick up the different delivery day or put to some package station, etc. So this kind of last mile delivery challenge becomes actually a logistic question by itself. So what if we would have a more precise delivery estimation? So I think that would also improve customer experience, but also, you know, solve basically a lot of money for the logistic provider like DHL, because, you know, if the package is not gets picked up, then they need to bring it back to the post station. People have to get next day, so which kind of a waste of time, money, and a lot of resources. You know, but this problem is of course also not super trivial to solve, because it's actually a serious optimization problem. So hopefully this actually two types of problems that I wanted to illustrate give some intuition about, you know, what is a problem driven. And some organizations might still find themselves in this problem driven situation, right? But if we find ourselves in a problem driven situation, basically those are the observations or recommendations that I would give, is that, you know, we need to understand that problem driven solution is a focused effort. It's not really like sort of open space, sort of open experiment effort, but it's a focus effort where, you know, actually there needs to be a business case to even try solving it, and there needs to be a budget available. If I imagine those problems above that I told about, you know, there is, it's obvious, and the intuition says there is a huge advantage, but we need to organize a team that solves this. And then we come to this competency map. So usually if the problem is that well identified, you would need to look and really in the specialized experts in the field. You're not going to look into some abstract data scientists or AI specialists. You're going to look into, you know, optimization experts or those kinds of keywords that you would throw, right? So, and the third one is actually the type of organizational setup that you would end up doing. It would be somewhat, I would call it applied R&D. So it's really, you need to set up a group of experts in a very specialized domain, focusing on a very concrete problem. So that is, I think, the summary and the challenge, and how this problem-driven solutions need to be developed. The second part, which I think, second type of the problem, which I think most of our customers also find themselves, is what I call the capability-driven. So the capability is a technological capability. So that we have all the intuition that technology exists, there exists some statistical or mathematical or data science method to solve something, to predict, for example, something, right? So we know that data scientists are able to, you know, categorize our customers in CRM. However, there is another challenges associated with this is that actually the problem is not well understood, right? And also the success of that problem, the definition of success is not well defined, right? So we fix sort of the technology capability, but where we then inherit a challenge in the field of actually defining the problem and proving the relevance of the problem, right? And this is what I call capability driven. And I think most of the types of problems where we should actually focus and what we are focusing is about this capability driven type. And it's actually, at the end of the day, it's mainly about prediction based on some existing data or historical data, right? So this is a classic machine learning types of problems where you have historical data, open data, and then you try to predict things like from stock prices to house prices to the cost of the car to all kinds of discounts. It's kind of all falls in the same category of prediction, or even you can predict the beer color and then think, well, that's kind of important attribute that impacts consumer, right? So all kinds of predictions, but it's very clear it's not any kind of optimization question, it's not any kinds of recognition question, right, where you need to recognize some pattern. It's about predicting a couple of very well defined values. So, and this, I find those types of problems are the capability driven. So, which actually puts ourselves in a different type of organizational setup, because capability driven solution, it is actually experimental effort. So not everything what is possible to solve, brings benefits. We need to put ourselves in this constant experimentation mode. Also, the challenge becomes selling solution to the business owner. If you have the capability inside the organization or outside to solve the problem, so usually you are not the one who profits from the solution. So you need to set up some collaboration with the business owners or revenue stream owner to actually sell the solution. And also the nature of that solution, that is always continuous improvement type of nature, also needs to be solved. And last but not least, what I want to say, it's very important not to confuse, problem driven and the capability driven. Setting up the, applied AI organization with a couple of data scientists or without any capabilities, it's going to be hard, right? So to summarize on this is basically, it is very important. I think that it's very important to classify what kind of challenge or challenges are you facing, and then from there on to sort of start going, left and right, and then, still having some guidance. And basically, in a sense, you might have seen this classic, like, who is a data scientist, and how we sort of interpret this is slightly different. In essence, what we say is, for a problem-driven solution, in this Venn diagram, you basically gonna end up somewhere more in the technology, in statistics, in math, and in innovative methods. Also, you need to have a solid computer science engineering capabilities and the platform that can handle your experiments. And the capability driven solution, this is, I think, the more traditional way how people see the data scientists, so that they also go and not that further into sort of advanced research method, but they go more further in the domain and business knowledge. So your data science team, or whatever you call it, it needs to become a part of the domain expertise or work closer with the domain expertise. So that is essentially the summary of this problem-driven and the capability-driven approach, and what that means also for your organization.
Good. So basically, we told you about these two approaches, the problem-driven and the capability-driven, but now still the question remains, so how would you go about identifying the problems worth solving? And essentially, like, what is like the recommendation that Andre and I have to like define what these problems worth solving are? So I will walk you through like this quite simplified way of looking at it. But if you, let's say, would take all of your problems, right? Like speaking here about mostly like your business problems. And then the first step would be to, within these, to identify the problems that should be solved with AI. And I'm specifically emphasizing here should be, because also what is quite common is to this kind of notion that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So the fact that a problem can be solved with AI doesn't mean that it's the right solution to use AI. So here also this kind of capability of knowing, does it make sense to actually take AI as the solution? So that's kind of step one, identify the pool of problems that are relevant for AI. And then the second step would be, to look around and see which out of these problems are actually problems that have been already solved on a technical level, right? And essentially this would lead, at this overlap, we have what we would then consider these problems worth solving. So they are both the problems that are should be solved with AI, but they also have been described and studied, and there's a method to solve it. So this would mean that we essentially have a solution that can be applied and not something that still needs to be invented. Because in this space that is outside of this problems worth solving area, right, we have problems that require actually a custom solution that needs to be still explored and needs to be built, which doesn't mean that you shouldn't go there, because if you have this kind of problem-driven situation, then you might actually, if the problem is big enough, you might want to go there, but really also with the awareness and understanding that it's a completely different type of project than staying within these what we define problems worth solving, which are, the solution actually exists, and it's more about identifying what is this problem that we are solving here. So that's essentially what problems worth solving are about. And the benefits of identifying these is essentially that we're reducing the risk of attacking the wrong problem, right? So wasting time, effort, and money on focusing our efforts somewhere where it's actually not the right thing. And then also, and this not to be underestimated, is giving the organization the confidence to take the next step. So essentially enabling action and knowing, okay, we're walking in the right direction. Now we will move forward to the second pattern, which is related, we call this the right focus. And within, so once you have identified problems worth solving, there is often still a large variety of problems. And it happens that organizations spend a lot of time and resources on solving problems which won't bring the expected business value. Or it actually turns out that the implementation of such a solution will be an enormous effort, and it's actually not worth going there. So Andre will tell you actually about a really interesting example there.
Yeah, there's this classical example, as they call it, called the Netflix $1 million challenge. Basically, Netflix at some point a while ago posted the challenge and invited the teams to compete, and it was about basically what we know as now as the core business of Netflix, sort of identifying, analyzing the videos and movies and sort of classifying and targeting. And there was $1 million actually prize. So there was a team that won that $1 million prize. However, that the algorithm and an approach that they developed, so Netflix was never put it in production. And the statement is that, they were not able to justify the engineering effort to bring them into production environment. So this is like I think really a classic example to support, not everything that can be done, and even very complex things can be done. There is still a cost factor, which is in this case making that algorithm working on a real production size of the data, because the size of the data was very limited, the one that was used in the challenge. So, to me, that is like as I said, really a classic example where certain things have not been considered upfront by posing this question, and because otherwise, you know, everyone probably would like to leverage the best solution behind, you know, $1 million prize. So we should keep that in mind, I guess.
Good. So let's think about how can we actually identify these, you know, the projects that will be the right focus for us. And essentially, it's actually relatively simple once you put it out there. It boils down to really identifying the use cases with the highest impact and the lowest effort, right? And here, impact is defined really as the value that is being created. And effort is, you know, often just the time, the cost, what it takes to build and to integrate. And as simple as this sounds, it's often not, actually this is like a really big challenge because it requires the involvement of various business stakeholders, right? Not only technology, but people that really also understand the business impact, and often as well external experts. And we basically apply a simple process to go, like a 3-step process to identify these use cases that should be the right focus. So the first step is really to define what we mean, like what is the what's our base for the project, right? So here an important conversation to have is to really ask, what do we define as impact? Because impact can mean many things. Is the impact measured by revenue? Is the impact measured by optimizing a certain business process? Maybe the impact we want to achieve is to grow our brand value or attracting more talent, right? So this conversation and understanding how do we define impact as a business, that's very important. The second question is, how do we define effort? How will we measure the effort that it takes to adopt and implement a certain solution that's going to come with a specific use case, right? And here, I think often what is being neglected is, like specifically in this Netflix example, you see this, right? That no one thought about what would it actually take to put that solution into production. And the last step in this define period is to actually also think about who needs to be part of this conversation, so that we keep the right focus on this, you know, the impact and the effort, and who are the people who will understand this, right? Who are the people within our organization and also potential external experts who will be able to estimate something like this, right? Or to have an opinion about what will it take to implement this. So once this is done, we have a second step, which is a exploration step, and this is an unstructured explorations for all of these use cases and all of these problems we're solving, and that's really a moment of divergent thinking. So here it's all about the quantity and not the quality, right? We're not yet thinking about impact and effort. We're just thinking about all of the different possibilities that are out there. And then in the last step, this is essentially where we are evaluating the impact and the effort that it would take for these use cases to be implemented, and then essentially picking the ones with the highest impact and the lowest effort. So yeah, the benefits, it's very similar to the first pattern. So it's often about reducing the risk of spending time and effort on low value projects. But here additionally, what this process brings with it is the alignment of internal stakeholders. So since we already made the effort to involve all of the different experts from our team, we already aligning and we also increasing here the return on investment, because we are specifically focusing on projects of high impact. And again, similar as before, this essentially enables action, because everybody who is part of the process, and it's a structured process, it gives us this confidence that we're going in the right direction, and this actually enables everybody to move forward. So now we will move on to our last pattern. So in this last section, we will focus on exploring to what it takes to plan and build a successful POC. And when we were preparing for this webinar, we actually talked quite a lot about, finding good examples here. And I really liked Andre said, well, what is the best kind of most successful POC that you have ever seen? And he said, well, concept cars are kind of like the best and most successful POCs, because they're very complex from a technology perspective, but they are very successful in actually leading up to putting the thing that is as complex as a car into production. So Andre will tell a bit more about that.
Right. I mean, everyone who knows me knows that I'm also a huge fan of cars and the automotive industry, and also because of that, I'm quite amazed always how they think about cars, because in a way, the concept cars is basically a constant sort of a pass from thinking from the ground truth, like what does luxury mean, or what like new urban mobility means, or what electricity means, and those kind of big trends, and what does it mean for for us as a consumers to drive that car, and sort of on the way from sort of going from these base principles to really mass production. There are a lot of things happening. It's not about like drawing some cool design, but it's also thinking about what kind of materials are needed. Is that possible to put that kind of car in the mass production, right? And I find this constant thinking process, from the basics to the really large scale production operations, which is happening. And it's a perfect learning exercise how we should also perhaps learn from that industry and think about these concepts, proof of concepts in a very systematic way, right? And like the most recent example, which I'm still quite amazed. I've seen myself in 2015 this concept of Porsche emission, what they call it, basically the first electric car from Porsche. And just yesterday they started taking pre-orders. So like in 4 years, by end of the year, it's going to go in production. So in 4 years, they went through this full cycle. What does it mean actually a sport car to be fully electric? Because there are still some fundamental challenges, in physics, aerodynamics, and this kind of things. And they go in production. So I'm quite excited about what's going on there. And as I always say, it's also we should learn from the leaders. And by the way, of course, as a part of that movement, automotive is a huge investor or adopter of also new technologies and new ways. And of course, autonomous driving is a part of it, which also drives a lot of interest to AI and computer vision and those kind of things. But however, if we go to the sort of more reality and practice, what we also see behind those big brands and big names and cool products, there are also organizational hierarchies. And I draw this imaginary hierarchy, which is sort of got me very much inspired by one of the cases that we face also in our customer. You have this hierarchy where you have a CIO, and then the data and analytics department that owns the capability to actually build a solution. You have an IT department that actually owns the platform and builds a platform and runs the platform and owns the budget for the platform. Then you have sort of a head of strategy, which actually sort of executes and oversees the strategy execution, which then reports to the CEO. And then you have a commercial officer, which actually has the branch who really own the customers. And so these branches, they end up in the different parts of organizations, which makes it extremely challenging to align and bring the solutions, or the, as we call it, cool stuff that is coming out of the data science team, bring it actually to the customer. You know, you have to go according to this schema, you have to go all the way to the CEO and then move it somehow down in the commercial department, which is, you know, actually it's a serious challenge. And I think we are in the need of you know, a better way of collaborating together, and not necessarily following all this organizational hierarchies to put really things in motion, right?
Yeah. Okay, moving forward. So, well, what's the solution, right? And like to actually reconnect with the with the automotive industry and the concept car. So what we believe is actually different there is sorry, is really this co-creative approach, right? So when planning a POC, and also like, so I think specifically in the automotive industry, is like also making different stakeholders part of building the POC, is this co-creative approach that kind of brings together different stakeholders. And so who needs to be involved? And we define basically three groups. One that owns what we call desirability. So these are the problem owners, the people who will use the solution or who will actually bring the solution to the market. So depending on the specific context, it might mean actually involving the people who are the end user, or the ones that do own the connection with the end user. So that's definitely something that is worth doing and including in the process. Secondly, the people who are within this feasibility circle, so that's the technology experts. So the team that will be building the solution, who will be implementing it, and that's actually most of the time this is already there. This is like practice. Of course, the people who will build it, they're responsible for driving also everything that is related to the POC. But often it actually happens that they're just on their own. And then the last group, of course, the budget owners that guard this viability topic, right? So the people who are actually funding the solution and expect a certain return on investment. So our proposal here is to say, okay, so if you want to build a successful POC, one that actually will have the buy-in from the whole organization and will have this this chance to survive after the POC state, is one that includes all of these different stakeholders, and they go through a co-creative process to build or to, let's say, mostly to plan, define the POC together, and then, you know, also go through the implementation of it. And yeah, essentially, again, this leads to a massive reduction of risk of spending time and effort on projects that won't get the necessary support to be implemented. At the same time, this involvement of all of the different stakeholders creates this commitment and ownership of the different stakeholders. And again, you know, all of this essentially leads to like the confidence to take the next step and to enable action, so that we are actually in constant movement towards the goal that we set ourselves. Yeah, and so these were the three patterns, and I will just very briefly summarize, right? So we talked about the first one, which is about problems worth solving, and that's essentially really identifying on a very high level what problems do we have that both should be solved with AI and are also currently, there's a way to solve them. So not that we, to avoid creating a situation where we're becoming really like a applied AI organization and starting like a massive research effort to solve a problem that is actually an unsolved problem currently. The second pattern is around finding the right focus. So how do we identify the use cases with the highest impact and the lowest effort? And then the last one was around successful POCs and how do we bring together all of these different stakeholders that are necessary to define and execute a successful POC that will actually continue its life after it has been proven. Andre, would you like to add anything here?
Well, no, I think actually, we are quite excited about this this structure ourselves, and if I look at the sort of the type of cases that we have, and the type of customers that we have, and the type of challenges that they face, I think that's really a right start to honestly and sort of openly put yourself in the right moment of time where you find yourself, and actually perhaps just going all the way to the beginning and just acknowledging what should I focus on, and then from there on emerge more the organizational part, and the focus part, and then see what kind of also technical organizational capabilities do you have? Do you have the in-house experts, or you want to do it with an external a company, or perhaps combine somehow the effort. So I'm quite excited about that that view, and I think we're gonna offer also more detailed kind of applied workshops around this pattern. So hopefully that will save actually quite a lot of time and frustration to all of us and our customers.
Yeah.
Hopefully also the participants. So I'm really encouraging you to get in touch, and perhaps we can have a look in your situation. And so now actually we have the Q&A moment. So we have this audio webinar. You can ask your questions actually in the in this client, go to webinar client, so you can post your questions if you have any questions here in the text form. I think there is no way to ask the question in using the voice, so you have to type it. I think let's just wait some moment to see if someone is really willing to put the question is in text. Otherwise, get in touch with us by other means, and we might have a more detailed conversations. So I'm not quite sure, to be honest, if the text way is the best way to kind of have this conversation, but let's see. And so I think that not really text questions here. So as I said, get in touch by other means, perhaps in persons, or just drop us an email. And I want to conclude with this quote from actually Microsoft Vice President, One Commercial Partner Group, which she said just 2 days ago, now in Inspire in Las Vegas. As we stand at the threshold of this new frontier, we are confronted with both excitement and fear. And the good news is, historically, when excitement and fear battle it out, excitement wins. So I think we should certainly, start exploring all that excited opportunity ahead of us. And AI is certainly the area to look at, and we are happy to help. So thank you very much, Martha. Thanks everybody for taking your time and spending it here with us, and let's stay in touch. Thank you. Have a nice day and have a nice weekend for those who are. Thank you. Bye-bye.